Okay, so I thought for a few weeks I want to talk about Shmittah, but what I want to emphasize that I'm not going to get it, and I'll be happy to answer any question you want, but I'm not going to get into detail. I want you to understand some concepts of Shmittah. And in particular, what I'd like to explain, because it's a very interesting topic, is what is this business about Heter Mechira, and why are so many people against it, and why are some people for it? So at least you understand that. It's a very interesting issue because it's halachically very interesting, and it's also historically very interesting. So there's an interesting historical background to the Heter of Mechira. So first, the mitzvah of Shemitah we read in last week's Torah reading, Parshas Bahar, and the Torah says that every seventh year in the land of Israel, the land must rest. In fact, Shemitah is called Shabbos, just as every Jewish person, we work for 6 days and we rest on Shabbos. The land can be worked for 6 years and it must rest on Shabbos. It is said, not on Shabbos, on Shmittah. Shmittah is the Shabbos of the land. They say the Panovich Rav, the great Rav of Panovich, would go around kissing the trees on Shmittah and wishing them a good Shabbos. He wished the trees a Shabbat Shalom for Shmittah. Now, let me digress with something that's not relevant to halacha, but I also want to explain why that's so. The Torah says you count Shemitah 7 times, and that takes you to year 49 in a cycle. And after year 49, you keep something that's called Yovel. Yovel in English is the Jubilee year. Now, Yovel is Shemitah plus, because on Shemitah you're not allowed to cultivate the land. On Yovel, you're also not allowed to cultivate the land. So that actually means when we kept Yovel, and I'll discuss why we don't keep Yovel, you actually had 2 years in a row where a farmer could not cultivate the land. Year 49, which is the 7th Shemitah in a cycle, and year 50, which is Yovel. But Yovel has 2 more laws that go beyond Shemitah. Number 1, which is not so relevant for us, anyone that is a slave goes free on Yovel. So Yovel is freedom for all slaves. That is the pasuk, Ukrasem Deror L'chol Yoshveha. You shall proclaim freedom to all the inhabitants. Those of you who are from Philadelphia or remember the Liberty Bell know that is the inscription on the Liberty Bell. Well, in English it says, proclaim liberty throughout the land. The Hebrew is Ukrasem Deror. Deror is freedom. L'chol Yoshveha, to all the inhabitants. So that's why it's called the Liberty Bell, because it has the verse, proclaim liberty throughout the land. It's from the Chumash. Ukrasem Deror. Well, did you ever hear this? This is really a bizarre story. I think they say it's not true, but it's such a neat story, I'll say it anyway. They say that when the United States rebelled against Great Britain, there was such anti-British sentiment. They hated the English so much that they didn't want English to be the national language of the 13 colonies. So the Continental Congress had to vote what would be the official language of what was then the United States, the 13 colonies. And it was actually proposed that Hebrew be the official language. Of America, not here, of America. And it got, legend has it, I think it's above my mice, but legend has it, it was defeated by 1 vote, which means if there had been 1 vote the other way, Hebrew would have been the language.
Did they know how to speak Hebrew?
They did, they absolutely did. In colonial times, the 3 classical languages that an educated person, I mean, the average person may not have known it, but if you were an educated person, you knew Greek, Latin, and Hebrew.
What?
These were the 3 classical languages that an educated person was supposed to know. Now, to give you an opposite story, when Israel, the state of Israel, had to decide what its official language was, not everybody wanted Hebrew to be the official language. Because the reason was, because Hebrew didn't have, in those days, a lot of technical or scientific terms. So they thought Hebrew was not suited for a modern language. So German or English was one of the proposals. So it got defeated. But imagine this, we could have had a world where Hebrew would have been the language of the United States, and English would be the language of Israel. So when all of you American students come to Israel, you'd have to spend all your time learning English, because on the on the other hand, I mean, listen, Torah works were always in Hebrew, so the Maisa, it would have been a big benefit for you if to grow up speaking Hebrew and then learning Chumash and Navi and Mishnah. That would be a tremendous thing. But the spoken language in the street might have been English. I have a feeling it's a bit of an exaggeration. This is a story that people like to tell. But be it as it may, Yovel has everything Shemitah has. Can't work the land. Plus, the slaves go free. Plus, and this is the biggie really, all land that was sold goes back to the original owners. Not the one, if I bought a field from you, it doesn't go back to you, it goes back to, the original owner from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Of course, he's not alive, but the heir of that original owner, Yovel.
Don't slaves go free also during Shmittah? Is that wrong?
No, that's a mistake. Let me explain the mistake. The Torah says a slave works for 6 years and goes free the 7th year. But that doesn't mean Shmittah. That's 6 years of work. Meaning, let's say I buy a slave the 5th year of the Shmittah cycle. He doesn't go free in Shmittah. He has to work 6 years. He goes free in the 7th year, whichever year that is. So Shmittah itself does not free a slave. It is 6 years of work that frees a slave. But if Yovel comes first, then he goes free. Meaning if he is sold 2 years before Yovel, then when Yovel comes, he goes free, even though he did not work 6 years. But if he is sold 2 years before Shemitah, so he works 2 years, he works on Shemitah, then he has to work another 3 years, and then he will go free. Yeah, that's a common mistake people make. People think that if the slave goes free on Shemitah, he does not.
Is there a difference between an Eved Kanani and Eved Ivri?
Yes. All of these rules about slaves going free is only an Eved Ivri. A Jewish slave goes free after 6 years or on Yovel. An Eved Kanani never goes free unless the master frees him. I can free my Eved Kanani by giving him a shtar, by giving him a document that says you're free. And then he's free. Although I'm not allowed to do that, but if I did it, he would be free. You're not supposed to free an Eved Kanani. Because the Torah wants the Eved Kanani to remain in a Jewish environment. So you're not supposed to free your non-Jewish slave. Yeah. But if I did, if I gave him a shtar, this is like a shtar shichrur, a document of freedom, he is free. But Yovel and 6 years is only an Eved Ivri, not an Eved Kanani. Okay. Alrighty. So this is, I'm sorry?
Is that, this is very off topic, but I remember learning, in colonial history, one of their excuses for, why they would want to colonize lands or, even take slaves is, the whole white man's burden idea. Want to educate them. So that sort of seems to,
Well, again, I
fit with this.
I hate to say it because, it can be offensive to people today. But I'm not endorsing that idea as applied to American slavery. But I think it's very, very clear that the Torah envisioned the justification of having non-Jewish slaves is a way of educating them away from immorality and away from Avodah Zarah towards serving Hashem. Remember, a non-Jewish slave, this is an important point, a non-Jewish slave is kind of partially Jewish in the sense that he has to keep Shabbos. If it's a man, he had to have a bris milah, he had to go to the mikveh. He is chayav, actually, a man is chayav in the same commandments as a woman, meaning he doesn't put on tefillin, but all the mitzvahs of a woman, a non-Jewish slave has to keep. So, now when he's freed, he or she is freed, they become a full-fledged convert. They become a gioris, whether they like it or not, actually. So they actually do become Jewish. In fact, the Gemara gives a story that Rabbi Eliezer owned a non-Jewish slave, and he went to shul, and there were only 8 people, and he was the 9th, and his slave was the 10th, but his slave couldn't count for a minyan. So he freed his slave in order to make a minyan. Now, that's a huge economic loss. I mean, a slave was very, very valuable. Now, I do know that people do ask the question. I mean, I'm not going to give you a whole share on slavery, although it's an interesting topic. You know, what's going on here? I mean, the Torah is supposed to be moral. I mean, don't we regard slavery as something evil? And the Torah has all these laws about slaves. What's going on? So there are two approaches to it. Approach number one might be that the Torah did not consider slavery desirable. Slavery is a bad thing. But everybody was doing it. Every nation in the world was doing it. And if Hashem would have said, don't do it, that would have been too hard for people. So instead, Hashem took something that's imperfect, something that's not a good institution, and tried to make it as good as you could make it. That you can't mistreat a slave, you can't beat a slave, you can't abuse a slave. So in that way, it's not that slavery is a good thing, but it was made as good as it could possibly be, because you have to take care of your slave, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. With respect to a Jewish slave, the Gemara actually says, he who buys a Jewish slave has bought a master. If you only have one pillow, you have to give it to the slave. Okay? But even a non-Jewish slave, that I don't have to treat better than me, I do have to treat him in a dignified, kind, and compassionate way. So one way of looking at it is, the Torah is not endorsing slavery, but the Torah is simply saying, if you're going to have it, let's do it in the best way possible. There's another way of looking at it, like you say, the white man's burden, frankly, and that is that the Canaanites in particular were people who were idolatrous, they were pagans, they were immoral, they engaged in murder and rape and the like. And by bringing them into a Jewish environment and giving them some mitzvah, so it's kind of like a forced conversion a little bit, you're civilizing them. You're giving them the potential for kedusha. So in that sense, there would be some justification. So I know this may not satisfy everybody, but these are like two approaches to how the Torah envisioned slavery.
So according to the second approach, slavery is ideal because it has a good result?
Well, I'm not going to say it's ideal for everybody. Not everybody's on the madrega that there'll be a good influence. But there is a justification because in many cases it is a facilitation of bringing people to Hashem and becoming more religious and more spiritual than they otherwise would have been, and it weans them away from the brutality of paganism and the like.
I thought that people have to choose that for themselves, and if you're living in an environment, maybe you'd be influenced by it, but ultimately it's much more favorable that people choose Judaism for themselves.
No, of course. I mean, keep in mind, we normally don't go around the world forcibly converting people. I don't go over to my next door non-Jewish neighbor and say, "Hey, convert to Judaism or I'll kill you." You're correct. I mean, slavery is kind of an unusual example of a coercion where the Torah is working with pre-existing institutions that existed in the ancient world and trying to pull something good out of it in that way. But again, as I say, slavery is a hard one. There are things in the Torah that we don't always fully understand. Okay, but so be it as it may, we have Shmittah and we have Yovel. Now, you'll notice, well, at least if you're old enough, you'll notice, that although we do keep Shmittah every 7 years, we haven't been keeping Yovel. We don't keep the Jubilee year. And it's been a very, very long time since we kept the Jubilee year. By the way, the Yovel year does not begin on Rosh Hashanah. It actually begins on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, of the Jubilee year, a shofar is blown. Besides the Rosh Hashanah shofar, the shofar is blown not after Yom Kippur like we do. On Yom Kippur, the shofar is blown, and that is a sign for Yovel to begin. The slaves go free, the fields go back to their owners, etc. So it's interesting that although the numerical year, whatever year it is, 5, 7, 90, whatever year is Yovel, begins Rosh Hashanah, but the Yovel halachas do not begin till Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the beginning of the Yovel year.
So it's less than a full year because it ends the next Rosh
That's
Hashanah?
correct. Yeah. It doesn't go to the next Yom Kippur. It ends at the end. So it's 10 days less than a full year. So when did we stop? So we don't keep Yovel today. We do not keep Yovel today. When did we stop keeping Yovel? So we've actually have not been keeping Yovel for a really long time. We don't keep it today. We didn't even keep it in the 420 years of the second Beis HaMikdash. So we did not keep Yovel in the second Beis HaMikdash. We certainly did not keep it in the 70 years of the Babylonian exile. And we didn't even keep it in the last 100 years of the first temple. Why? We stopped keeping Yovel when the 10 tribes of Israel were exiled. Right? You know your history here. After Shlomo HaMelech died, and he was succeeded by his son Rechavam. So there was a revolution, a massive revolution, where 10 tribes broke away from Malchus Beis David, the Davidic line. And the 10 tribes established a northern kingdom, which is called the Northern Kingdom of Yisrael. And the southern kingdom only had 2 tribes, Yehuda, Binyamin, but they also had Shevet Levi, because Shevet Levi was around where the Beis HaMikdash was. So, the 10 tribes had their own line of kings, mainly bad ones. Achav, all sorts of bad guys. The Malchus Beis David, from which Mashiach will come, only ruled over those 2 tribes, plus Shevet Levi. Right? So the book of Malachim, when you learn the book of Malachim, it gets complicated because it's always zigzagging between Malchus, what's happening in Yisrael, what's happening in Yehuda, etc. So I just want to change my recorder. I have to promise somebody would record this. I apologize for the delay.
He was Rechavam?
Well, Shlomo's son was Rechavam,
Rechavam.
but the first king of the northern kingdom was Yeravam ben Nevat. He was known as a big Russia. That was Yeravam, right? So you had Rechavam and Yeravam. Remember how it was. The Gemara says you should always listen to the advice of older people who have more experience, because people went to Rechavam and said, taxes are too high, give us a tax break. So Rechavam speaks to the older people, and they said, yeah. If you want people to be loyal to you, you have to be kind to them, you have to be compassionate to them. The younger people said, these guys are complainers, got to be tough. And he went with the younger people, and he said, if my father gave you taxes, I'm going to double it and triple it. And there was a revolt, etc. Okay. Now, what happened was, these are two different kingdoms with 2 different monarchies. And the Malchus Yisrael didn't even let people go to the Beis HaMikdash. They put guards like East Berlin and West Berlin. If you were from the 10 tribes, you couldn't even visit the Beis HaMikdash. They put guards to stop you from doing it. They put up Eglei Zav. They put up their own golden calves that were worshipped. Right? This is in the book of Malachim. Now,
This is the 10 tribes. The 10 tribes had the Beis HaMikdash?
No. The Beis HaMikdash is where the 2 tribes are, because the 2 tribes, right? So the 10 tribes had no Beis HaMikdash, but they didn't want people to go to visit the Beis HaMikdash. So they erected their own temples to their golden calves, Avodah Zarah. And people were nichel Avodah Zarah. Now, the 10 tribes were exiled by Sancheriv, the king of Assyria. And this was more than 100 years before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And these are what we call the lost 10 tribes. According to many, many views, they still have not been totally reunited with the Jewish people. Now, over the years, there have been many, many theories. Some have sources in our Sforim, some don't have any sources. Some people believe the American Indians were descendants of the 10 tribes. Some say the Vikings. Some say the Pashtuns of Afghanistan, which is a 30 million tribe which practice Islam, are from the 10 tribes. We don't really know. But when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, like 100 years later, there was only a small fragment of the Jewish people that was even left. The tribes of Yehuda, Binyamin, and Levim. That means virtually every Jew today, you're either Kohen, Levi, Bas Kohen, Bas Levi, or Yehuda or Binyamin. You're not Yisachar or Zevulun, because the 10 tribes were exiled. Okay? So here is the thing. Yovel has a halacha that in order for Yovel to be kept, most of the Jewish people have to be living in Eretz Yisrael. And from the time of the exile of the 10 tribes, which is even before the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, most of the Jewish people were no longer living in the land of Israel. And from that time on, we stopped keeping Yovel. So this is pretty amazing. It's not that we stopped keeping Yovel when the temple was destroyed. No, we stopped keeping Yovel all the way from the Golus of the 10 tribes. Now, what's interesting is, if you think about this for a moment, because of the absence of Yovel, the computation of Shmittah is going to change. Because when you had Yovel, this is how you counted Shmittah. You did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Shmittah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Shmittah. And you did that 7 times. So that takes you to year 49. Then you have Yovel. Yovel counts for year 0. And then the year after Yovel is another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In other words, Yovel did not count towards the next Shemitah. Yovel is like a placeholder. But once you don't observe Yovel anymore, you just go with a continuous count of 7s, like we do now. We just count 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. We don't have any break for a Yovel because we don't keep Yovel. Which actually means, if you think about it, Shemitah today is observed earlier than it would have been in the time of the first Beis Hamikdash when you kept Yovel. Right? You understand the dynamic, because when you kept Yovel, Shemitah was pushed forward a year. Every 50 years it was pushed forward. Today we don't push it forward. Today we just go with an unbroken 7. So we count 7, 6 Shemitah, and we do that 1,000 times, whatever it is. There's no break for the Yovel. When Mashiach comes and the Yidden are all brought back to Eretz Yisrael, then we're going to go back to Yovel again, and then we're going to use Yovel to push off the Shemitah year. Okay. Yeah.
So was there ever a time since 100 years before the first temple was destroyed that we kept Yovel? Or no?
Not since then. Not since the... Now, here's the thing that the Jerusalem Post sometimes says. They point out, well, we don't keep Yovel because the majority of the Jews aren't living in Eretz Yisrael. Well, demographically, statistics are indicating that we actually are approaching 51%. We're not there yet, but in the very near-term future, even if Chas v'Shalom Mashiach doesn't come, we will have more than 50% of the Jews in the world living in Eretz Yisrael. So does that mean we're going to get Yovel back once we hit demographically 51%, or actually 50% plus one person? So the answer, and that would be very, very complicated. How would you sort out? I mean, how does a person show that I'm right? I claim the Tel Aviv beach strip because I'm from Yisachar or whatever. It's like, by the way, that's a good, I tell people, if you're looking for, when Mashiach comes, you're going to have a job. The Rambam says, even after Mashiach comes, you have to have a job, right? So what type of job should I have? So I suggest become a title attorney, because a title attorney is someone who investigates ownership of real estate. Because when Yovel comes, people are going to have to establish their claims going all the way back to Yoshua ben Nun 3,000 years ago. And that's going to be a really, really difficult process to do. Yeah. So that way you could, you'd have a good parnasa. But okay. But be it as it may, So the Jerusalem Post sometimes raises the specter, is Yovel going to come back when we hit the 51%? So I just want to tell you that it will not come back. And the reason it will not come back is the following. First of all, when you say, let's say you make a number like 51% of the Jews will live in Eretz Israel. Well, that means 51% of people who identify themselves as Jews. There are huge numbers of people who don't even know they're Jewish. So that's, you don't have a majority of Jews. Second of all, the lost 10 tribes are still lost. So even if it's a majority of Jews, but that's not a majority of Am Yisrael, there's the 10 tribes. Now, third of all, and this is maybe the most important of all, even if you had a majority of Jews, there's another condition. A majority of Jews must be living here in their tribal divisions. Meaning you must be living in your ancestral land, and that, you don't know. You don't know what that is, so that's not going to happen. Okay, so the good news or bad news is that until Mashiach comes, we will not have the criterion of most people living here in a proper way, so we're not going to have Yovel, right? So Yovel will not happen until Mashiach comes, okay? So this is Shemitah, and this is Yovel. So Yovel we do not keep today. Shemitah we do keep today. Now, second point about this. Is Shemitah a Torah commandment, or is Shemitah a rabbinic commandment? Now, you may ask me, how can I possibly talk about it as a rabbinic commandment? The Torah very, very clearly commands us to observe the Shemitah year. That's very true. But here is the chap. Many Rishonim, many poskim say that on a Torah level, Shemitah lapses whenever Yovel lapses. Because since the Torah writes Shemitah and Yovel together, whenever you lose Yovel, you also lose Shemitah. Meaning, just as we don't observe Yovel, because most of the people are not in Eretz Yisrael, that would equally apply to Shemitah. And that which we keep Shemitah is a rabbinic enactment that we should remember this mitzvah. That's most opinions. Other opinions do say that Shemitah and Yovel are independent, and even if Yovel lapses, Shemitah still is the oraisa. So that's a very big machlokas, which on one level doesn't make a practical difference so much, because even if it's Rabbanan, you have to keep it, but you will actually see that it will make a difference. Whether we look at the Shemitah Bisman Hazeh, meaning from the time of the exile of the 10 tribes, do we look at it as rabbinic or we look at it as Doraisa? So just keep that in mind. And analytically, that depends on whether Shemitah is connected to Yovel or Shemitah does not depend on the Yovel. Okay. And you'll see, by the way, this will be very, very pivotal in analyzing the Heter Mechira. That's why I'm bringing this up. Okay, issue number 2. First of all, number 3. What is the translation of Shemitah, literally? Shemitah means release, let go. Right? Shemitah, if I drop a pen, it's like lishmot, minayad, let it drop from the hand. So Shemitah is about releasing, right? You own land, you want to cultivate it, you want to farm it. Hashem says, let go, to acknowledge that Hashem is the master of the land, and you put your bitachon in Him, that He will take care of you, and you don't have the attitude of kochi v'yotzim yadi, that it is my power and my strength that gives me all of this ability. Now, if Shemitah means letting go, there are actually 2 types of letting goes that are involved. There is what is called Shemitas Karka, letting go of the land. And then there is something called Shemitas Kisafim, letting go of money. Now this is a part of Shemitah a lot of people don't realize. Shemitah, letting go of the land, basically means that during the year of Shemitah, I am not supposed to plow, I am not supposed to plant, I am not supposed to fertilize. I am not supposed to cultivate the land. We'll talk about how do you eat. We'll talk about that. That's a major question. But basically, I refrain from agricultural labors. That's Shmittah of the land. Shmittah of money is a different thing. If I lend you money, this is again, maybe it's less known halacha, I lend you money, and you don't pay me back, Shmittah is like a bankruptcy. It cancels all outstanding debt that one Jew owes to another Jew. That actually means if I lend you $10,000 and you don't pay me by the Shmittah year, it is usher for me to try to collect that money for you. It's usher for me to even ask you to pay. Now, it is a mitzvah for you to offer to pay me. But even if you offer to pay me, I'm supposed to say you don't have to. And then you're supposed to say, but I want to pay you anyway. But if you don't say you want to pay me anyway, I may be coughing. You didn't say the next. I am not allowed to ask you for the money.
What about during Shmittah?
No. Okay. So now I'm going to. Okay. Now there are two differences between Shmittah of land and Shmittah of money, even though they're both Shmittahs. Difference one: Shmittah of land is only Eretz Yisrael. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, there are no restrictions. Right? On a Shmittah year, I can work my vineyard in New York. I can do whatever I want. Shemitah's Kesef even applies outside of Eretz Yisrael. So, if I lent you money in Crown Heights, and we both live in Crown Heights, or Brooklyn, or Manhattan, or Baltimore, Shmittah cancels the loan. So that's difference number one. Chutz La'aretz versus Eretz Yisrael. Difference number two, and this is what you just said, the Shmittah of land laws begin at the beginning of Shmittah. Rosh Hashanah of 5782. Loans, however, are only canceled at the end of Shmittah, which means if I lent you $10,000, let's say 2 years ago, I am still permitted now, middle of Shmittah, to try to collect my debt. Because Shmittah does not cancel indebtedness till the end of the year. Which means, if I did not collect before Rosh Hashanah of Tuf Shin Pei Gimel 5783, I cannot collect it anymore unless you voluntarily give it to me. I can accept it, unlike interest, which I cannot accept even if you offer it. If you want to offer to pay me, I can take it, but I cannot ask for the money, and I certainly cannot go to court or Beis Din to get that money. Okay, so this is Shemitah's Karka, and this is Shemitah's Kesofim. Now, Shemitah's Kesofim has a very important qualification, which is based on a takana, an enactment that was made by the great Hillel. Right, everyone knows Hillel. He's called Hillel HaZaken, Hillel the Elder. He was the one who always argued with Shammai. Hillel was known for his not only greatness in Torah, but his kindness, his patience. He was the one who taught the guy who's standing on one foot the whole Torah. What is hateful to you, do not do to another person. Right? This is the great Hillel. So Hillel made an enactment, which is a very funny word. It's called pruzbul. And pruzbul is a way, I'll discuss what to do, because even today you have to do a pruzbul. If you're owed money, you have to do a pruzbul. Otherwise you won't be able to collect your debt. Is a way to keep indebtedness alive, to prevent Shmittah. Hillel gave lenders a way to prevent Shmittah from canceling the debt. Now, before we even explain what pruzbul is, you might ask a question. Hey, I thought Hillel is the nice guy. Why is Hillel doing a favor to the banks? Why is Hillel doing a favor to lenders? The answer is he's not really doing a favor to lenders. He's doing a favor to poor people. Because what happened was, poor people were unable to get loans close to the Shmittah year. Because the lenders basically said, why should I lend you money? If you hold off paying me for a few months, the loan is going to get erased. So what happened was people were starving because they could not borrow money. Because people with money were unwilling to lend them that money. So Hillel gave lenders a way to keep the loan alive. So yeah, he is benefiting the lender, but you understand, by giving the lender a way to keep the loan alive, poor people were able to get credit that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get. So the word pruzbul, which may be Persian, it's not Hebrew and it's not even Aramaic, means a law for the benefit of rich and poor. It helps the rich because they'll get their money back. It helps the poor because they'll be able to borrow. So what is a pruzbul? This is why Hillel made it. So a pruzbul means, let's imagine, I am owed money. I've lent money. Maybe I lent money to one person, maybe I lent money to 100 people. I stand before a Beis Din. A Beis Din just means 3 rabbis. They don't even have to be rabbis, but 3 learned people. And I declare to them, I am transferring my debts, my loans, to the Beis Din, that it now belongs to you. Now the halacha is, Shmittah does not cancel money owed to a Beis Din. So by transferring my loans to a Beis Din, these 3 people, Shmittah will not cancel it. Of course, the problem is, but they own it, not me. So how do I get my money? And then the Beis Din, authorize me to collect the money as their agent and keep it. So basically, I stand in front of 3 rabbis or 3 learned people, and I declare, in English or Hebrew, there is a Hebrew nusach, I hereby transfer to you, the Beis Din, all of the money that is owed to me, and request that you give me permission to collect it. The Beis Din gives that permission, and they give him a document, they give me back a document signed by them saying that this declaration was made. This is called a pruzbul. Any person that is owed money, or any person that thinks they might be owed money, if you don't know, must make a pruzbul no later than Erev Rosh Hashanah coming up, before the end of Shmittah. You don't need the permission or the consent of the borrower. Because if I needed the borrower's consent, he'll just say no, right? So I don't need to even tell him. But I need to have the pruzbul, because if the borrower doesn't want to pay me, the pruzbul will give me the ability to collect. Now, let me point out, actually here Chabad has an interesting psak from the Alter Rebbe. Most opinions say you make the pruzbul before the end of Shmittah, but the Alter Rebbe had a chumrah that you should also make a pruzbul, it's already too late now, before Shmittah, meaning you actually make 2 pruzbuls. You make a pruzbul before this year, and you make a pruzbul before next year. So according to that, well, the reason is because some opinions say that once the year of Shemitah enters, even though the cancellation will not be in effect until the end, it's already a canceled debt subject to the waiting of time. So you can't make a pruzbul once the debt is canceled. Okay. So I think Chabad people make 2 pruzbuls. Oh, you may ask, well, why make 2 pruzbuls? Why just make one in the beginning? The answer is, you can do a pruzbul now, by the way. The problem is, pruzbul only covers loans that already were made before the pruzbul. In other words, pruzbul will protect the money I already lent. But if I make a pruzbul today and I lend you money tomorrow, it's not covered by the pruzbul. So that's why you make a pruzbul at the end to cover any loan you made, even during Shmittah. Okay, so this is Pruzbul, and this is a takana of Hillel Hazaken in order to enable poor people to borrow money shortly before Shmittah or during Shmittah. Yeah.
Why is it that if a person owes money to Beis Din, they have to pay it back? Does Shmittah not cancel that out? Like, why does...
Yeah, so the Gemara the Gemara itself has different drushos interpreting biblical verses. That it's only, the Torah says, money that is owed to your brother, your fellow Jew, you don't have to pay, but the Beis Din is a representative of Hashem, and therefore it's like money you owe to Hashem. That would mean, a modern example would be, if you owe traffic tickets to a Beis Din, let's say, when you had a Jewish state, a Jewish court, so you'd have to pay your traffic tickets even after Shmittah. Money, a fine owed to a Beis Din, and the like. Okay, so again, so what we've done is we've subdivided Shmittah into two categories. There is the Shmittah of land, Shmittah's Karka, and there is the Shmittah of Kesafim, of money and indebtedness, which can be circumvented by Pruzbul, etc. And Pruzbul is commonly done. Again, anyone that's owed money, or even if you don't know, should make a Pruzbul. So I'm sure as we get closer to Rosh Hashanah, your teachers, Rabbi, will tell you about Pruzbul. Although I don't know how many of you lend money, but you never know. Even if you lend somebody a little thing, if you lend somebody 10 shekel, you can't ask for it back once Shmittah is over, unless there was a Pruzbul. So you may, yeah.
If you lend during Shmittah?
Same thing during Shmittah. Same thing. Yeah. Now, if you lend during Shmittah and Shmittah finishes, then it's canceled.
Right. But
During Shmittah you can collect. Yeah. During Shmittah you can ask for it. Yeah. Because Shmittah does not cancel till the end of Shmittah. Okay. So now, though, let's go back to Shmittah's Karka, which is the main issue in Eretz Yisrael. That is, Shmittah's Karka has a number of distinct components that you need to know about. I just want to list them, because there are a number of distinct rules that people aren't always aware of. Rule number one is agricultural work. That there are restrictions on agricultural labors. This would refer to plowing, this refers to planting, this refers to fertilizing. And this is complicated, but unless you're a gardener, most of us don't need to know all of this. I will just say that you need to know one important rule about agricultural labor, and that is, there is a difference between improving and preventing destruction, meaning you are allowed to do labor to prevent the death of a tree or the death of the fruit. So you can water plants enough that they shouldn't die. So you don't water them to increase their growth, but you water them on a maintenance level so they shouldn't die. And that's going to be a very complicated halachic question. What is called maintenance gardening and what is called producing, improvements in gardening. Okay, so that's what you need to know about agricultural work, just as a general concept.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to buy a potted plant and just water it, not change it, I'd be allowed to do that?
So that's actually a lot more complicated than you would think, because technically Shemitah only applies to the ground and not to a pot. But on the other hand, if the pot is resting outside, it may be connected to the ground in that way. So the only heter you have, the only unconditional heter you have to do whatever you want with a potted plant is, number one, keep it indoors, under a roof, that means. Merpeset is good too, but it has to be under a roof. And number two, put a metal or plastic plate under the earthenware pot so it's not connected to soil or something like that. Okay, and if those two conditions are met, you can do whatever you want. If those conditions are not met, you can only water it sufficiently so it shouldn't die, but you can't really give it extra water and the like. Okay, so that's the agricultural aspect. Now,
So there's no issues with buying the plant?
oh no, you can buy the plant. Yeah, buying is okay, but the issue is what can you do with it once you've bought it? Okay.
Can you even buy it if it was planted during Shmittah?
So that's a very good question. That is a very good question. That's a big machlokas. There are many opinions that say you are not allowed to get any benefit from something that was produced in violation of Shmittah laws. So you should not buy anything that was planted during Shmittah. That's very true. On the other hand, if it was planted by a non-Jew, it might be permitted. Because the non-Jew doesn't have to keep Shmittah. Right? So there was no Aveira that was done in that case. Now, rule number 2 is the status of what grows during Shmittah. And that is, you're not allowed to plant, that's for sure. But what about things that grow by themselves? You have an apple tree. Apples grow on the tree. You didn't plant the apple tree. The apples grow on the tree. So this is another important halacha. Every produce that grows during Shmittah is hefker. It is ownerless. It is available to every person to take. So let's imagine I have an apple tree that's growing in my backyard. I am allowed to take apples too. I'm no worse than anyone else. I can take small quantities of apples for me and my family on a daily basis. I can't harvest the whole tree. But I can take, if we want 5 apples for today, I can take 5 apples. But I have to let everybody else take apples as well. Each one taking only for day to day, not quantities. And that means it is asur d'oraisa to prevent somebody from picking your fruit. It's not your fruit. If you lock your gate, etc., asur or put your watchdog, your guard dog there, it's asur. Now, if you are concerned for security, you're concerned for terrorists or crime or wild animals, so you are allowed to lock your gate, but then you have to put a sign that says, all fruit is hefker, and you have the right to come take it. Please call this number. I'll let you in. Yeah. But you have to put a sign saying, it's hefker, and please call me and I'll let you in, something like that. Okay? So that's the second aspect. Shemitah produce is hefker. You're not stealing if you take it. You are free to take it. Now, that has another corollary, interestingly enough, that you don't have to take truma and meiser from Shemitah fruit. Because the halacha is, right, the different separations. Most of us never have to do this because we buy it under hashgacha. But normally, if you were to, let's imagine you go blackberry picking, or whatever it is, blueberry, in a non-Shemitah year. You do know, I hope, that in Eretz Yisrael you would have to take off truma and maser from it. If you don't know how to do that, it might be a little unclear, a little unfamiliar. So when you pick fruit, you go to an orchard and you pick fruit with permission, you got to separate various tithes. On Shemitah you don't, because the rule is anything that's hefker, anything that's ownerless, does not have a mitzvah of truma and meiser attached to it, and therefore the produce of Shemitah is exempt from truma and meiser. Okay, so I've mentioned 3 aspects so far. Number 1, the agricultural restrictions on work. Number 2, the idea that everybody can have access to the Shemitah produce. Number 3, the exemption for truma and meiser, because it's hefker. Hefker is exempt from truma and maser.
Why is it exempt?
Say again?
Why is it exempt?
Well, again, these are all, these are really drushos. These are interpretations of psukim. That the halacha is that only when somebody owns produce is it obligated in truma and maser. When something is ownerless, it is not obligated in truma and maser, even if somebody then acquires ownership. Okay, so far so good. Now I'm going to say a 4th rule, which is not going to make sense when you hear it, but I'm going to say it and then you'll see how it's going to make sense eventually. This fourth rule is called sapichen. This is a bit of an unfamiliar word. Sapichen, samach, pei, yud, ches, yud, nun. It's not Hebrew, it's a Mishnaic Aramaism. Sapichen means wild growths, things that grow by themselves. And this refers not to fruit, this refers to vegetables and grain. In other words, things that are planted annually, right? The primary difference halachically between what is a fruit and what is not a fruit is whether it's an annual thing, something that has to be planted every year, is a vegetable or grain. Something that doesn't have to be planted every year is a fruit, like an apple tree. You don't plant an apple tree every year. And that is, sapichem means vegetables or grains that you did not plant during Shmittah, but just grew from themselves, from seeds that were left over in the ground from last year. Chazal made a gezerah, a rabbinic law, that you're not allowed to eat them at all. They are prohibited. They are treif. Meaning the only Shmittah produce you can eat, again, this is not going to make sense when you first hear it, the only Shmittah produce you can eat are fruits. You cannot eat Shmittah produce of vegetables and grains. Right, so the obvious question is, so how on earth do you have bread or whatever? We'll get to it. And the reason the Rabbanan made this takana was for the following reason. If you could eat the grains or vegetables that grew by themselves, you might deliberately plant that stuff and then claim later, oh, it just grew by itself. Right? Who knows? So in order not to allow people to deceive the system by breaking the halacha, Chazal said, hey, even if it grew by itself, we're not going to let you eat it. So think about the repercussions for a moment. That actually means vegetables and grains that grew during Shemitah are forbidden to be eaten.
So you won't find Kedushas Shvius vegetables and grains?
That would be the pashtus. But here's what the Chazon Ish said. The Chazon Ish, he died. He was Rav Chaim Kanevsky's uncle. He died in 1955, and he came to Eretz Yisrael in the 1930s, and he really was kind of the pioneer in how Jewish religious farmers would observe Shemitah. And he has many writings on Shemitah. And he makes the interesting point that not everybody agrees, but we follow this, that this extreme gezerah of sapichem is only if none of the plant or vegetable or grain grew before Shemitah, meaning it totally sprouted and grew during Shemitah. If even a little bit was visible above the ground, it will have Kedushat Shviyit, but it will not be sapichem. So, according to the Chazon Ish, it is possible to have vegetables and grains that do not have the issue of sapichem if there was some noticeable growth above ground before Shemitah. Okay, so again, just to keep on going over the list here, so we've mentioned, number 1, agricultural restrictions. Number 2, the hefker, the accessibility of the fruits to everybody. Number 3, the exemption of truma and maser from those fruits. Number 4, the rabbinic enactment on grains and vegetables that is called sapichem. Number 5, you already brought out the phrase, the laws of Kedushas Shvius. Now, Kedushas Shvius, and this is something that is very relevant to a consumer, we have to know this, means that even the produce of Shmittah I'm allowed to eat, like fruits, have to be they're considered holy, and they have to be eaten in a holy manner. What this means primarily for the consumer is, if it is Shemitah produce, now a lot of stuff you buy is not Shemitah produce, but assuming it is Shemitah produce, you're not allowed to waste it. So that's why you got to be careful. Even the peels have to be not put in regular garbage, but they're put in a special receptacle only for Shemitah, and only when it rots and spoils you can put it in the regular garbage.
Can you just double wrap it and put it in the fridge?
Or you can double wrap it. You can double wrap it. You can't. The point is you can't mix it with regular garbage. Yeah, double wrap it is good. You have to eat it in the normal way, meaning to say, you can juice produce that's normally juiced. But if you let's imagine you had some crazy liking to make juice of a fruit that nobody makes a juice of.
Kiwi juice.
Kiwi?
Oh, people do.
No, people do. The truth is almost everything is people juice today. But whatever. Broccoli juice. Yeah, well, broccoli is sapichin. That's another problem. Okay, but something like that. You have to eat it in the normal way it's consumed. Now, the truth is, today everything is normal. People ask me, "Can you mash bananas for banana cake?" I think you can, because that's not an unusual thing today. But on the other hand, if you read the halachos of like 100 years ago, they would actually say no, because those were not the usual things people did. So what's usual actually does change with time. That things are... juicing is another good example. There were all sorts of juices. Nobody had, 50 years ago, all you had was orange juice, right? Now you have this juice and that juice and that juice, blueberry juice, date juice. They never made date juice, but now it's very delicious. Date juice is really good, really nice and sweet. But that's a relatively new thing. They historically did not make juice from dates or whatever it is. So again, I don't want to go over the pratim, because you can talk to your teachers about the exact details about this, but I want you to understand the general idea. Kedushat Shvi'it means not wasting. It means not throwing into garbage unless double wrapped. It means not preparing in an unusual way. And then there's some other things to be aware of. Not taking outside of Israel.
Really?
This is very, very interesting. If you're planning a visit, let's say you were planning a visit to America, and you simply want to take along a Shemitah apple. Now, a lot of your apples are not going to be Shemitah, but assuming it's a Shemitah apple, he says you're not allowed to do that. Unless you eat it in the airport, because you're not allowed to take Shemitah produce outside of the land of Israel.
You also couldn't take it to Eilat, right?
That's correct. Eilat that's correct. You could not take it to Eilat. That's right. Now, yeah.
Question about sapichin. Does the Torah allow, just strictly from the Torah, does it allow?
Yes, sapichin is an issue of Rabbanan, right? So whatever grows by itself is perfectly fine. Although it would have the Kedushat Shvi'it, but you'd be allowed to eat it.
Right.
Okay, now I want to continue Kedushat Shvi'it's laws, right? So can't take it out of Israel. Next one, can't give it to a non-Jew. Now, this could be very, very funny. Let's imagine, many people, particularly the elderly, they have aides at home. They call them, the Hebrew word is Filipino, simply because, a Filipino is a Filipino, but so many of the Filipino, but it's actually where the modern Hebrew word for a home attendant is Filipino. Because so many Filipinos, because they're so excellent, they're extremely good. They're so patient and kind, and it's really like the ideal, perfect person for this type of job. So a person says, I have a Filipino, even if the person is from America, whatever it is, and the like. So you want to give her some fruit. If it's Shemitah fruit, you cannot do it. You have to find some other fruit. Again, most of the fruit we eat is in fact not Shemitah fruit. I'll talk about that. But if it's Shemitah fruit, this is Nichlal and Kedushat Shvi'it. Again, don't waste. You must dispose not by mixing in garbage with double wrapping. You must prepare it in the way it's normally prepared. You do not take outside of Eretz Yisrael. You do not give to a guy. Now here's yet another one that's going to be very strange. Peiros with the holiness of Shemitah are not allowed to be sold. What that actually means is, when you go to a store and you buy a Shemitah fruit, technically, if it's halachically set up in a proper way, you are just paying for the labor and the transportation. You are not paying for the fruit. In a way, that's a corollary of the Hefker idea, that nobody owns Shemitah produce, and therefore you cannot do business with it. You cannot, with a lulav and an esrog. Okay, I'll save that for now. I don't want to, but technically, when you buy a Shemitah esrog, you're getting the esrog for free, and you're paying all that money for the lulav. See, lulav, the only thing that have kedushat shvi'it are edible things. So lulav, hadassah, and aravos don't have any Shemitah sanctity, so they could be charged for it. I could charge you for that. Now, normally that doesn't cost anything. I mean, when you buy a lulav and an esrog, you're really paying for the lulav. I'm sorry, you're paying for the esrog. Right. But next year, when you're going to buy a Shemitah one, you're paying for the lulav and getting the esrog for free, because they're not allowed to charge you for the esrog.
But isn't that just like a technicality?
Yeah, well,
you could say, oh, well, you're paying for this, but like, how would anyone?
You're correct. It is a technicality. This is an area where we work with a lot of technicalities. Okay, all of these laws are called kedushat or kedushas shvi'is. Okay, the sanctity of Shemitah. So again, let me keep on going over the list. These are concepts. I'm not here so much to give you every specific in and out. We have the agricultural restrictions. We have the requirement to give everybody access to Shemitah fruit, hefker. We have the exemption from truma and maser. We have the rules of kedushas shvi'it, such as not wasting, double wrapping, not preparing in an unusual manner, not taking outside of Israel, and not selling. Right? No commercial activity. All of that is kedushas shvi'it. And now the fifth concept I want to mention is a concept called Bior. Bior is Beis Yud Ayin Vav Resh. Bior means eradication. And I hope this word sounds a little familiar to you, because we use the phrase Bior Chametz. Right? We had Pesach. Right, so the night before the Seder, we do bedika, we search for the chametz, and then the morning, Erev Pesach, we do bior chametz. Now, bior chametz, for chametz, means physically destroying the chametz by burning it or the like, bior chametz. So bior does mean destruction of chametz, and there is a concept by Shemitah as well called bior, removal of, but you'll see in a moment, bior of Shemitah is not the same as bior of Chametz. And this is a law of Shemitah, interestingly enough, that does not really apply in Shemitah. It applies the year after Shemitah. And here is the principle. It's going to be a little complicated. Shemitah fruit, you're allowed to eat. It's even a mitzvah to eat, as long as you keep the laws of Kedushas Shvi'is. Okay, that's basic. I can eat the apples, the pears, the grapes, the quinces, the bananas. Bananas are also not sapichim because you don't have to plant a banana tree annually, etc. However, and these are based on drashos, these are based on psukim. You're only allowed to eat Shemitah produce as long as there's enough produce in the fields that the animals could still eat. Meaning, I can eat Shemitah apples if there are still Shemitah apples on the trees or on the ground that the animals could eat. It doesn't have to be my particular apple tree, but generally in the area. But at the point of time at which there's no longer any produce left for the animals, you're no longer allowed to keep this in your house. You must take it outside and make it hefker and give other people and other animals access to it. So bior does not mean eradication. Bior means removal from your house in an open area once you've hit a date in which this produce is no longer available for the animals who would forage. Now, which means I can eat apples as long as there are still apples in the field for animals. Now, how on earth am I supposed to know when that date is? Now, usually it'll be sometime in the 8th year, meaning sometime in the 8th year, there'll be no apples of the 7th year in the field anymore. They've all been taken in. So I don't understand how Chazal could do this, but they actually compile calendars. You can get a calendar that gives you a date. I mean, how on earth do they compile these dates? I don't know. It'll tell you, English or Hebrew, the last day that Shemitah apples are in the field will be February 2, 2023.
They know that from 2,000 years ago?
They know, no, Chazal didn't give you all the dates, but in recent years, they've looked at the past averages and right? So it's amazing. So if you have pears, if you have apples, if you have bananas, if you have grapes, you can only eat that stuff until the date of Bior. Now,
if you keep it in your conserve, can you still eat it?
So here's what you have to do. So on the day of Bior, you are obligated to take whatever Shemitah produce you have, take it outside, and in front of 3 people that you're not related to, declare that it's hefker, right? So anybody could take it, then count to 10, and then you are permitted to take it back in, and then life goes on normally. So I understand. I understand that this sounds a little evasive and the like, but you do have to do it in a public place. You do have to have 3 people you're not related to. They do have the chance to take it, but if they don't, you can take it back. This is called Bior. Now, if you miss the Bior date, then the fruit becomes forbidden and it must be destroyed. So this is fairly important, that you have an obligation of Bior on the Bior date. If you fulfill your obligation, you can then reacquire it and then you're fine. If you don't fulfill your obligation, the peirot become forbidden. This will be a date for every fruit and vegetable. You may ask me a question. Is Bior relevant for grains and vegetables? So you might tell me, well, Bior is not relevant for grains and vegetables because grains and vegetables have the prohibition of sapichim, so you couldn't eat them to begin with, right? That's a very good point, and that you are correct, or I'm correct. But remember the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish said that any grain or vegetable that began to grow above the ground before Shemitah, even though all of it grew during Shemitah, is not within the Gezerah of Sapichim, and therefore you would be allowed to eat it b'ketushas Shavias, and therefore you'd have to have a Bior date for that as well. Now, let me tell you where this comes up. I'll tell you where this comes up. This will come up primarily in bottles of wine. There are bottles of wine already circulating that are made from Shemitah grapes. And the wine must be drunk with the holiness of Shemitah. That would mean, for example, you could not put out a Havdalah candle with the wine of Shemitah. It'll say it if it's Shemitah wine, etc. Okay? You cannot, perhaps it's not even clear you could cook with the wine unless that wine is commonly used for cooking. But you're only allowed to drink the wine before the Bior date of grapes, which is sometime in the 8th year. Actually, for grapes, we actually have a date of Chazal. Chazal actually told us it's Erev Pesach of the 8th year, meaning Shemitah grapes are in the field until Erev Pesach of next year. That means Erev Pesach of next year, any Shemitah wine you have, you must be mafkir in front of 3, and then you can take it in. Okay? If you're not mafkir in front of 3, that wine would have to be destroyed. Okay? So it's a complication to be aware of. This is the din of Bior, Peiros, Shemitah. Okay, so we did quite a lot of concepts. Again, it's a concept more than specific rules. I want you to understand the concepts, and if there's any question on the concept, I'll answer it. Again, we talked about, number 1, agricultural restriction. Number 2, the hefker of Shemitah produce. Number 3, the exemption of Truma and Maser. Number 4, the Kedushas Shavias. Number 4 was Sapichim. Number 5, Kedushas Shavias. And number 6, Bior. Okay, a lot of stuff to know about Shemitah, right? Quite complicated. So these are the concepts that you have to work with in the universe of Shemitah. So the next thing we'll talk about, maybe I'll save it for next time, is based on the interaction of all of these concepts, how do I eat on Shemitah? What do I eat? Where do I get my food? What are the different ways I can get food? What are the halachic problems with the different ways? And the like. And essentially, you will notice in all probability that probably most of you have not had to deal with Shemitah that much. Because the reason is, maybe it's not the best way, but the simplest way of keeping Shemitah is to avoid Shemitah. Now, that's not the greatest thing, theoretically, but the way we avoid Shemitah is by either eating imported food, meaning food from Chutz La'aretz, which doesn't have the Shemitah laws, or food that at least was grown in the 6th year. So if you walk into any supermarket, at least a Haredi supermarket that has a hashgacha, you will see bins of things that are marked shishit, which means 6th year, or chul. Chul is abbreviation, chutz la'aretz. So shishis and chul, no problem at all. If it's not from Israel, no problem. And if it's from the 6th year, it was harvested before Shemitah, not a problem. No sapichim issue, no kedusha shvias issue, no beer issue. Right? So shishis and chul are the easiest way to live. Now, you are losing something with that, because remember, Ramban actually writes, to eat Shemitah produce b'kedusha is actually a mitzvah. So if, and I admit, I also am lazy. I mean, I also use shishis and chul. I'm going to try to maybe buy some bananas, Shemitah bananas, to fulfill the mitzvah. But shishis and chul have the advantage that you are not subject to any Shemitah law, so by definition, there's no Aveira you could be doing. The negative is, you also don't have a mitzvah. You don't have the mitzvah of eating b'tushat shviyat. Other things like Heter Mechira and Otzer Beistin are going to be much more complicated, and we will talk about that. But let me just say, even something as simple as Yivul Chul is not so simple. Because what is Chul and what is not Chul? Chul is Chutz La'aretz. So if something comes from France or Germany or England or the United States, that's Chul. But it gets a little complicated because there are parts of Eretz Yisrael, or well, I should say parts of the state of Israel, that might halachically be Chutz La'aretz. You mentioned Eilat before as an example. But this is a major issue with near Eilat, the southern part of the Negev, called the Arava. Now, the Arava actually produces quite a lot of fruits and vegetables because it's like an oasis. And there's a big machlokas if the produce of the Arava is Chol or Eretz Yisrael. Because if it's Eretz Yisrael, it would have Kedushas Shavias. And not only that, but there would be an Aveira to produce it. If it is Chutz La'aretz, It does not have Kedushas Shvius, and there is no Aveira to produce it. So this is very, very interesting, that the most Charedi Hashgachos, which are the most strict, are actually very makel on this question. They're very lenient. Let me explain the question. The question is a very technical question. The question is, what is the southern boundary of Eretz Yisrael? That's the problem. Those who consider the Arava to be Chutz La'aretz consider the southern boundary of Eretz Yisrael to be north of that. Those who consider the Arava to be Eretz Yisrael, they move the southern boundary south of that. And there's a huge, huge machlokas. Of all the four directions, it is the southern boundary that is the most uncertain. The western boundary of Israel is very simple, the Mediterranean coast. The eastern boundary is pretty simple, it's the Jordan River. The northern boundary, a little more complicated, but we kind of know where that is too.
It's the Jordan River, but I thought when Yeshua conquered the land, there were tribes that lived outside.
Yes, Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, they lived east of the Jordan River, and that land too may have some Kedusha, but we don't really get anything from there. That would be Jordan and Syria. I mean, you are correct that there might be some question about the holiness of that, but we simply don't get anything from that. So that part is not going to be a live question so much. But the southern boundary is very, very uncertain, because the Torah says the southern boundary goes to Nachal Mitzrayim, the Egyptian river, but does that mean all the way to the Nile, which is pretty far, way past Eilat, or does that mean Wadi al-Arish, which is the Sinai Peninsula? So there are going to be areas in the Arava that some consider to be within Israel. I mean, it's within the state of Israel, but within Eretz Yisrael, and some say not within Eretz Yisrael. So it's interesting that the Eida Charedis, which is the strictest hashgacha, is lenient on Arava produce, saying it doesn't have Shemitah laws. There are Dati V'Yumi, who maybe because they're more nationalistic, who are actually machmer, they want to expand the boundaries. So this is an interesting position, and they have different. This is a whole, you might call it a halachic specialty of boundaries. Many people are not. I mean, I'm also not a big expert in it. Exactly how you figure out the southern boundaries, and that's why you'll see when you buy a package, you'll see it'll tell you, is it from Arava or not, so you can talk to your own posek whether it should be treated right. So Yevul Chol is a simple idea. Produce from Chutz La'aretz is not subject to Shmittah. That's a simple rule. But you may have problems how to apply it when you're dealing with the Arava and the like, okay?
And land that's owned by non-Jews.
Okay.
Not Hashemashira, but
we'll talk about that. That's going to be a big, big question. That is a huge machlokas. And this is not Rav Kook. This goes back all the way to Rav Yosef Karo and the Mabit. The Mabit, Rav Yosef Karo was the Rav of Tzfat, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, in the 1500s. Time of the Arizal, Rav Ramak, all the great Mekubalim. And Rav Yosef Karo was the Gadol Hador in Halacha. He was also a Mekubal, by the way, as well. But the head of his Beis Din was a great rabbi as well, called the Mabit, Moshe ben Yosef Trani. And although they were working together, but they had an absolutely big, big machlok. According to Rabbi Yosef Karo, the produce of a non-Jewish owned land in Israel does not have the holiness of Shemitah. According to the Mabit, it does. And that had huge, huge machloksim that have repercussions to this very day. Yeah, they were both Sephardi, but so it's not an Ashkenaz Sephardi thing, but it is a Yerushalayim B'nai Brak thing, and we'll talk about that. Okay, that's called Yavul Nachri, and we will talk about that next week. But the two options that are non-problematical are Yavul Chol and Yavul Shishis, and the only problem with Yavul Chol is mainly the Arava issue of the southern boundary. Okay, so again, I hope this was not too overwhelming, but at least conceptually you should have a map of what the Shemitah issues are. Okay, See you next week. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.